Welcome, Mr. Arabi, and thank you very much for giving us this interview. Well, let's start with this horrible terror attack on October 7th that we've seen of Hamas against Israel and its citizens. If we look at this terror attack, which might change the Middle East and the future fundamentally, it must have been planned over months, even probably over a year. And the question is, how could Hamas plan and finally work out this military attack without a strong financial and political backing of a much bigger ally? So the question which raises here is, what role do you think did Iran play in this attack? And further on, if you look at solutions, what must we do actually to answer and to deter Iran? But let's start with the question: what role did Iran play? What do you think?
Sure. So it is simply inconceivable that this Hamas terrorist attack on October 7th took place without not only the green light of the Islamic Republic of Iran, but the strategic planning and coordination of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. And if we take a step back, we have to really understand the nature of the relationship between Hamas and the IRGC. So the nature of this relationship really starts to flourish in the early 1990s, where Israel expels Hamas militants into Lebanon, and we see Hamas militants being trained at the Hezbollah University for suicide training, suicide bombing missions, but also a contingent of Hamas militants being sent to Tehran to undergo missile training by the so-called godfather of the Iranian ballistic missile program, IRGC commander Tehrani Moqaddam. We also see that the sophisticated smuggling network underground that exists in Gaza today, which has been the mechanism to deliver armaments, funds, etc. to Hamas, was a product of an IRGC Quds Force strategy and plan spearheaded by Qasem Soleimani and Imad Moughenia, the former terror chief of Hezbollah. Not only that, we see that in 2008, the IRGC sought to replicate the model that it established in southern Lebanon after the 33-day war in Gaza through the creation of the Reconstruction Committee for Gaza. The Reconstruction Committee for Gaza's goal was for the IRGC to advise and prepare and devise a strategy to reconstruct civilian buildings in Gaza, homes, schools, mosques, hospitals, with the sole purpose of storing Hamas missiles, making it much harder for Israel to target and identify Hamas positions, but also increasing the civilian cost of doing so, all incorporating as part of the IRGC's psychological warfare doctrine. We see this playing out today in this current conflict. What we're seeing in Gaza today is a product of this IRGC plan. Now, more recently, this is where it gets important. In 2021, we saw that the IRGC Quds Force, for the first time, created a joint command room in Lebanon where it brought Hamas, Hezbollah, and itself in one room to coordinate, plan, and orchestrate terrorist attacks against the state of Israel and Jewish targets across the world. We also see recently annual funding for Hamas has increased from $100 million annually to $350 million. And on top of that, recent doctrinal, tactical changes to the IRGC all pointed to, in the months leading up to this terror attack, they were moving towards confrontation with Israel. The Revolutionary Guard's fingerprints are all over this. Hamas simply would not be able to conduct a terrorist attack on this scale. This was Israel's 9/11 moment.
Yes, it was, definitely. But Nasrallah said in his speech, it's 100% Palestinian. You know, we didn't give a green light. We didn't even know. So you think that's tactic? It's not true.
Absolutely. This is part of the IRGC. This is at the
propaganda, kind of.
Propaganda, but it's also at the heart of the IRGC's plausible deniability strategy. So the way in which the IRGC operates for its terror proxies is to conduct terrorist attacks with enough plausible deniability to avoid any consequences being imposed directly on Tehran. This is at the heart of the IRGC strategy. That's why, by the way, the Revolutionary Guard operates through non-state actor terrorist groups. It has successfully deployed this, by the way, against American targets, against European targets, across the Middle East, across the world. And it's something, by the way, that I think is becoming increasingly of interest to Vladimir Putin in Russia, where we're seeing greater coordination at the military level between the IRGC and Putin's regime. And really, this opens up the possibility of Putin gaining access to the IRGC's network of non-state actor terrorist proxies so as to conduct and coordinate attacks on Western interests and positions with enough plausible deniability to avoid any consequences being imposed on them. Just last week, or the week before last, we saw a senior Hamas delegation visit Moscow, being welcomed to the Kremlin despite the ongoing terrorist attacks. This took place at the same time as Kremlin welcomed a senior Iranian delegation. This is extremely worrying, and really I think we're witnessing, maybe we already are witnessing, the emergence of a new axis of terror. We're seeing terror in Ukraine being inflicted by Putin's regime with coordination of the IRGC drones, and we're starting to see this elsewhere beyond Ukraine. I think this should be treated very seriously by the West.
How does it come? I mean, have we been and are we still too naive to see that Iran and Russia are building this terrorist axis, as you said, and that Iran is actually so crucial, you know, and could really plan and work out with Hamas this attack? I mean, we always thought that at least the Israelis, you know, and the U.S. should know what's going on there, but obviously we haven't. How does that come? How was that possible, or is it possible?
Well, I think part of it is, you know, politics, and look, all the intelligence is there that the regime in Iran was involved. Multiple reports, including in top US outlets, the Wall Street Journal reported on this, how Amir Abdullahian, the Islamic Republic's foreign minister, who, by the way, is an IRGC Quds Force affiliate, was working with senior Hezbollah and Hamas militants, and at a strategic coordination level. Amir Abdullahian has been doing a tour of the Middle East recently, has met with senior Hamas officials, including Ismail Haniyeh in Qatar, as well as Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, and they've been open in stating that the next stage of this conflict is a multi-front attack on Israel via other proxy actors. So part of it is politics, because if you underline and reveal the Islamic Republic's hand in these attacks, then the West would be forced to impose consequences on the regime in Tehran. Does the political will exist for that? All the signs indicate that there is no political will for that at the moment in the West, and the regime in Iran knows this, so it's taking advantage of it.
I mean, that's the main question for the future. You know, everybody is asking, how can we prevent a regional escalation, a regional war, or even an international war? Meaning, in the end, how can we prevent a direct confrontation of Iran and US? So what do you think? How will Iran act? Will they give a green light, for example, to Hezbollah to escalate more in the north, which is Hamas claiming for? But and if this access exists, I mean, shouldn't the West restore deterrence against Iran? What should we do? What must we do in order to prevent such an escalation?
I think, look, in terms of the next stages, everyone is focusing on Hezbollah. Hezbollah is obviously the most sophisticated of the regime in Iran's terrorist proxy organisation. But the regime in Iran also has lethal terrorist organisations, lethal terrorist proxies that were specifically created in 2014-15 and designed to target Israel. These are the Fatimiyun militia, an IRGC manufactured group created in 2014-2015, started off with 1,000 militants that quickly increased to 15,000 militants after sanctions were eased on the Islamic Republic as part of the 2015 nuclear agreement. You've got the Fatimiyun in Syria, you've also got the Zainabiyun made up of Pakistani Shia, recruited, radicalised IRGC militants. They have played an active role in these attacks in that they are targeting consistently US positions in Syria. The Fatimiyun and Zainabiyun militia have also mobilised towards the border of Israel, and Esmail Vani, the commander of the IRGC's Quds Force, which controls this terrorist network, has created a new joint war room on the border alongside the Golan Heights. These proxies in Syria do not have to worry about the domestic constituency. Hezbollah has to worry about that. For the IRGC, there is less cost, less risk for any engagement from these proxies in Syria than for Hezbollah to engage. So I think that Syria dimension is really important, and we've seen at least 35 attacks from these militias against US positions. There's been so far one US response.
So that's not enough, you think? We have to, the US has to bring back deterrence, or not only the US, actually, it's the West who should act here now?
Absolutely. There needs to be a collective Western response. We are stronger when we are united, and I think the Ukraine conflict has proven
this, yes.
And it caught Putin off guard, and it's inflicted damage on their grand imperialist strategy in Europe. We need to replicate the same thing in the Middle East. Khamenei is no different to Putin. The point here, though, is, of course, the US has deployed nuclear submarine. Of course, the US has deployed its forces to aircraft carriers in the Middle East. But the point is, does the Revolutionary Guard believe the US really has the appetite to use these tools against Tehran and impose consequences on Tehran? So far, all the signs indicate, and based off their calculus, the US doesn't have the political will to do this. Now, how do you change this calculus? You change this calculus by not only targeting IRGC assets in the region, but making it very clear to the regime in Iran that if this escalation continues, if the terrorist attacks against Israel continue, the IRGC assets inside of Iran are legitimate targets and will be targeted by the US. That would send a clear message to the IRGC and the regime in Iran that escalation is not an option on the table.
Will not be accepted. But is there something that also we can do here? What about, the IRGC is still not on the terror list in Europe.
Yes.
Is that a mistake? Neither the Hezbollah, so isn't that a mistake? Here everybody is keep on saying it's only symbolic, so it's not necessary, and there are a lot of disadvantages. Maybe the EU want to keep up the back door for the JCPOA, the nuclear deal negotiations. What's your position on that?
And I think you accurately covered that. The IRGC is a violent Islamist extremist organisation that is conducting terror attacks, it is conducting terror plots in Germany, in Britain, across Europe. But not only that, the IRGC is proactively seeking to nurture homegrown Islamist radicalisation and homegrown terrorism on German soil, using methods like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. However, unlike ISIS and Al-Qaeda that are prescribed in Germany, the current sanctions regime on the IRGC does not prohibit its ability to disseminate jihadi propaganda, does not prohibit its propaganda activities. That's where prescription, that's where prescribing the IRGC as a terrorist organisation will have practical impact. It's not just symbolic. It would give government, it would give civil society groups, it would give technology companies a clear mandate to impose an outright ban on any activity, including cultural, propaganda, soft power activity that the IRGC is conducting in Germany. Not only that, it would equip our local communities, our local schools, our teachers, our police force, our councils with the necessary tools to take preventative steps against Shia and IRGC radicalisation. At present, the German Preventing Radicalisation Programme, like the European Union's, like Britain's, is exclusively focused on Salafi jihadism, meaning IRGC radicalisation, Shia radicalisation is a complete blind spot. Prescription would equip our local communities to deal with this and will give them the means to counter and prevent Shia radicalisation and IRGC.
So thank you very much, because this is something very concrete Germany and Europe could do in order to fight the IRGC and to deter Iran, so to say.
And the German government can do this as a home, it's an interior ministry issue, just as it used, in an ideal world, you would do this collectively in the European Union. The evidence is there, but in the European Union, the political will isn't. So Germany has to judge, like Britain, does the IRGC pose a serious national security threat to Germany? The answer to that is yes. Is the IRGC active in Germany? The answer to that is yes. Is the IRGC trying to conduct terror plots in Germany? Conduct surveillance? Yes, we've got evidence that they're conducting surveillance against Jewish kindergartens, against Iranian diaspora members. They put together a list across Europe of Jewish targets, members of the German Jewish community. If the answer to all of these is yes, which it is, then the Interior Ministry can prescribe the IRGC just as it prescribed Hezbollah, and it needs to do so immediate effect.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks so much.